Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Into the Motiverse. Today we have Stephen Platten, and he's a principal consultant working in quality and testing for many years, Motiverse ambassador, speaker, and welcome, Stephen. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, hi Rosie. Thank you for having me. Appreciate the kind introduction.
No problem. Would you, for the benefit of the audience and the listeners, would you like to give a bit of a more detailed introduction to yourself?
Sure. So, like most testers, didn't come into testing the traditional route, which seems to be the way. So, I was originally an Air Force engineer, so worked on fast jets and software systems for about 13, 14 years. And then the last, probably 5, 6, 7 years of that period, I was actually doing software testing, and I just know that's what it was. So it was like trials and evaluation, validation software work, was working based upon requirements, creating test cases, not knowing that was even a thing. Introduced through one of my lab managers at the time. He taught me like the very basics, like black box, white box testing techniques, things like that. And it evolved off the thing of like, oh, this is actually a career. Did not know that. And then let a lot of the touch points in my critical thinking skills came from that position. And then after that, I left the forces, kind of just from a work-life balance perspective. It was quite intense. And I joined a company called Kinetic with a Q. And those guys are defense contractors, so they do all the trials and evaluation of kind of anything that goes into service from the military. So everything from new engines, new radar systems, and submarines and everything in between. They have ranges, wind tunnels, telemetry equipment, kind of loads of crazy stuff. And again, more test validation type work that I was doing there. So I was basically a consultant during that period for about 2 and a bit years, where I was helping the MOD validate and put systems into service based on my testing experience I built up in the forces. So it's kind of just doing the same thing, but with a slightly different coloured blue shirt on. And then after Kinetic, I did, I think what I would say is like my first proper testing role, because it was called test. Like the word test was in the title. Everything up to that point wasn't really test, just something else. And that was in a place, it was Yorkshire Water, so one of the big water companies in the UK. Started there as a test lead, managing a couple of projects, maybe 5 or 6 testers, and then quickly promoted up to one of the test delivery managers. So I was managing a big portfolio, I think like a headcount like 30 people in the end. So operations side, which was like all the bits that actually go into producing water and handling wastewater, which is actually really IT intensive. I never realised until I worked there. So that was my first like really cutting my teeth with like test management and test leadership. And then after that, we went to Admiral Insurance. I worked as one of their chapter leads. I was in their API component team and a few other places. I wasn't there for very long, just didn't kind of fit with the culture too well. And then bounced to my current place, which is where I'm working now, which is Inspired Testing. So they're a pure software testing company. And I work as one of their principal consultants, which is a very long-winded way of saying I do whatever they need me to do. Everything from direct test management for ways of working and frameworks and kind of everything real from in between. The Stoic tester, which is like my pseudonym I go through on LinkedIn, and people might know me from that. That came off the back of like really challenging time in my life when I transitioned in from the forces, picked up Stoic principles as a philosophy, and then I kind of just bred it into the Stoic testing approach, which I use myself. And that was also sent me on the rabbit hole journey of the critical thinking stuff, which I'm hopefully going to enjoy talking to you about today, and where that all came from and why I'm like a huge advocate of it, especially with our wonderful friend AI and all the constant headlines we read about it. I think that's about it. Maybe personal stuff if you're interested. I'm also a massive nerd, which is probably not a shock if you're a tester. It's kind of common ground. I read a lot. I'm into competitive war gaming as well, with 40k. I'm in a team, so my LinkedIn posts tend to be talking about AI, talking about philosophy, talking about testing, and then occasionally I'll talk about toy soldiers and about hobby stuff. In between, it's a very erratic and eclectic feed if you follow me. But yeah, that's maybe me in a nutshell.
Awesome. I love the wargaming stuff. And yeah, also when you said they're consultant and saying that you basically do what they tell you to do, anything that they tell you to do is interesting because people are asking and say, "Oh, you're a consultant, so what is it that you actually do?" And it varies so much.
Yeah.
It got me thinking about like the generalist kind of angle as well. Like there's a bit of a trend, I guess, in recent years of people saying that they're more generalist or they have to expand their skill set or they have to be able to do many things. And I guess that kind of connects the dots there for me.
Yeah, I think it's if you hear the term polymorph or equivalent, it's a bit like that where generally me and you, the PCs, we know about most things, but we'll have our depths in certain areas, and the team's quite good in terms of we've got a reasonably deep like structure. So what I might be weak at, someone else will be strong at, and we try and offset each other. But generally, I can be asked from anything from Steve, how do we approach testing this solution with a client to what does a good dashboard look like, to can you train these testers on performance testing, to what's positioning on these different frameworks, what's your views on it. And so it's a very eclectic way of working, or maybe I'm making it sound more eclectic than it is, but it does definitely help with your ability to generalize and get a perspective of wider things. I think the downside maybe in consultancy, Rosie, is like clients don't tend to come to consultants if everything's going really well. Like if their QA department is like absolutely smashing out the park and like everything's working amazingly, they don't tend to come to us for help. It's not many clients that are like, this is on fire, how do we fix it? So I often sometimes long for the client doesn't really need much from us. It's actually good. Normally it's clients who are kind of having to stand up entire services from scratch, which is a good challenge, but yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I guess tapping into like the critical thinking aspect and even Stoicism. I often like the posts that you write in general, even if it doesn't even mention Stoicism. But I can kind of feel like the reflectiveness in your words and the balanced nature of it, or like considering the different perspectives. Of whatever it is you're talking about. And I think like one that comes to mind is like you wrote one about like comparing like Stoic and ISTQB. And I was like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
that's nice. It's like really balanced. It's weighing in on the positives and negatives of both sides.
Yeah,
and that, and that's cool. It's nice to have that kind of mature reflections, I think.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I certainly got my fair share of people not taking it that way, which I was trying to be very impartial and just seeing it as an exercise. I think it's interesting to do, but I've seen two sides of the industry from two different perspectives. I'm going to sit kind of in the middle, like testers like to do, and just give an impartial view in it. But I think, it was. I did have some challenging conversations after it as well. So
interesting.
Yeah,
maybe not one for the podcast.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
But I guess tapping into critical thinking, like what was your first introduction into critical thinking? Because maybe it's best to start like early on, and then as we weave ourselves into AI, it's like what did it look like when you started on that journey, and where is it heading now? I guess like with all the considerations of AI.
Yeah, it didn't start. Well, I guess a certain element of it was the Stoics stuff. So there's a big thing in Stoicism of trying to separate your. I'm going to try and say this but still get across there is empathy and compassion in Stoicism. That you're trying to pull your emotion or create some distance between the thing that has happened, the information that you're receiving, and the emotion that you're going to feel. So, bad thing happens, immediate emotional reaction is anger, anxiety, whatever. You're trying to create a bit of a gap between those two things, and subjectively, where you can look at the thing that's come in and deal with it. And I guess that's like one of the more first aspects of critical thinking is trying to remove I say remove it, it's such a brutal way of saying it, trying to not let the emotion of the thing overwhelm the thing. So like if I try and use I'll try and not butcher this with maybe a testing analogy, and I did this at the Leeds Atelier where I said, if someone says to you, like a delivery manager or someone like that wants to put something into production, and you're just not happy with it because, let's say, steps were missed and they just kind of steamrolled you and just went past you. If I bring anger and hostility into that conversation, it's probably not going to be incredibly constructive. They're not suddenly going to go, I can see that you're really angry, I'm going to immediately capitulate with my position and just let you get on with it. Because they don't really care that you're angry at that point. It's more about trying to present, not validate my anger, understanding it, but then not allowing it to overwhelm my response back. And critical thinking really underpins that. It's separating the noise from the evidence of what you can see, and then thinking about it impartially and then presenting a view back. So that's, I guess it started from the Stoicism, and then I realised I never realised that there's so much that where people would kind of argue and present facts or present something, and then when you assess the bias or where that has come from, you'd be like, oh, that's interesting. So I won't name any specific people, but in the forces, there's a number of large organisations that supply stuff for them, and the logical fallacy was, because they're so big and amazing, like big and successful, everything they do will be immediately of high quality. I'm like, is that true? Like, as a critical thinker, I'm like, is that correct? Not in all circumstances, surely. There must be examples where they've cut corners, not done things correctly, not by malicious intent, but things just happen, right? People make mistakes. So, like, that's an example of like a cognitive argument that people often have for themselves when they're presented with something. And it kind of evolved off the back of that philosophical journey, for want of a better description. And then as AI started to creep in, I was just like, critical thinking became even more, in my head, more important than anything else, because I think and we can get into it a little bit later, but the AI space is really full of like snake oil salesmen, for want of a better, like everyone's trying to sell you like, this is amazing and it will save you 12 hours a week and it's all automated and you don't have to worry about it and the quality is amazing and it does all the jobs. It does it. Where's the evidence? Then looking at it impartially, super important. And I think testers don't get necessarily caught up in that too much. Like, we're maybe not victims of it, but I think certainly other organisations and people definitely are. They get sucked into the AI hype train.
Yeah, absolutely. Going deeper into critical thinking.
Yeah.
How would you define critical thinking? Because maybe that's somewhere to dive into, and then
yeah. I'm probably going to I'll probably butcher the definition of it, but I'll try. So critical thinking is almost the ability to separate yourself from anything that might affect your ability to make a decision on something. I think that's the way I'm going to try and frame it. So what I mean by that is you should try and only make a decision where possible on the information and evidence at hand, but take into account there is things that might have affected that evidence and that information and how it's presented. I'll give you a really simplistic example, and which might be better than my poor attempt at a definition. If I show you a graph on the news that says the trend in the last 3 years, if I just give you a graph in the news and it's looking like it's going up, like, amazing, that everything's going up, it's great. I'm happy that, let's say, the economy is on its way up. That's great. A critical thinker would go, you've shown me this graph. Where's the data come from?
Yeah.
Who created the data? What is the message the person is trying to tell me with the information they presented? What happened? Why have you only shown me the last 3 years, not the last 20? Because if you widen it out to the last 20, it actually shows that it's overall going down, and the last 3 years has gone up. So, but overall, it's down from the last 20. So critical thinking is trying to like pick apart those things pick apart that kind of information and trying to see to the root cause of something. So it's kind of based in the Socratic method of conversations, where you would try and get down to the raw truth of the matter as much as possible and remove any biases or false information or kind of argumentative techniques that people would use. You see this a lot in politics, and the reason this kind of more and more accelerated is that originally I will do a book recommendation. I've got it here, but it's a book called from Anthony Weston, which is a rule book of arguments, which is a really good critical thinking book. And the argument I make from the book back into this is that testing isn't necessarily an activity; it's an argument. It's an argument. So, as an example, you could see testing as like, here's my strategy and my report and a risk assessment and everything else. Or, but if you strip all that back, it's someone saying, I believe the system is good enough or it isn't. And then here is the evidence that I've got to back that up. Mm-hmm. That is ultimately an argument with some evidence behind it. And someone who's critical thinking should be able to look at the evidence, understand it, and then agree or disagree with that person. Not for the sake of arguing the point, but for the point of getting to the truth of the matter. And in the book, he especially talks about we as testers, and I think everybody, we make arguments about things, and we make the same cognitive mistakes. We use the same patterns over and over again. And he goes through these patterns in a bit more detail. And then as I got more and more involved in AI, I'm like, the arguments were everywhere. Like all the time, I'm like, that is an example of this, that is an example of that, and I couldn't unsee it. So the concept of this conversation was like to dig into why that's the case. So if you think about it, like why would you encourage testers to learn critical thinking skills when AI is gonna quote unquote save the day or ruin it, depending on your side of the fence? So like one of the biggest problems we have, I think, as a test community, isn't the lack of tools or technology or anything like that. It's the ability to challenge what those tools produce and have effectively the argument about the thing that's been generated. So the phrase I'm going to probably post about is like AI's made it what AI's done right now is made it, you've given the people the ability to produce confident nonsense. So it looks really polished, it looks amazing, but if you just like scratch a little bit with your critical thinking skills and you unpeel it, there's a mess underneath. Right? Not in all cases, but certainly there's a lot of that going about. And then from that book, it's that how I'm seeing those arguments and seeing those patterns, I think has been really helpful for me to unpick things. And help me be a better tester ultimately, and that's where I wanted to get to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on there. Like as you were explaining, like what critical thinking is, I say, oh, that's quality people testing. That's what we do all day, every day, and it describes us and our roles. But I also think perhaps we're getting better at it, but definitely. I've had many chuckles, as I would say, looking back at our careers, and sometimes we argue too much, right? Or we argue about the wrong thing, or the arguments stall progress, or that it doesn't. The arguments don't help us move forward when the business or the software is just trying to move forward, and we're like celebrating a bug we found, but that might not actually help us. Or we might argue about a problem that's just like insignificant compared to the things that are actually going on.
So in that example, there's a couple of things you pick out there. One of those, like as a principle, be fair to the opposing view. So as testers, it's very easy to take the viewpoint of the opposition to the other party, and then philosophy of like they're pushing a delivery or pushing a release, and we are taking the opposing view. Now, because testers often have more critical thinkers by default of the profession, we tend to be quite good at arguments. But it doesn't necessarily mean we should be winning them all just because we're better at arguing. Yeah. Better at arguing isn't the reason you should win the argument. It should be the evidence and the correct decision that wins the argument. So I think often something we can do as testers is be fair to the opposing viewpoint, especially as I see as a consultant. I often try and go, well, I can totally understand the business's view on this. If they don't put this thing into production by this date, there's an impact to the revenue, there's an impact to people's jobs, there's an impact to the reputation of the company, whatever that is. They can easily see you as someone who's trying to allow that to happen, right? And that creates an adversarial conversation, which you don't want to have. And I think, but then if you flip it back the other way, people who aren't testers tend to overgeneralize the arguments. So, like, have you finished testing yet? How many times you've been told that, Rosie? Like, is it? Have you finished? I don't know what finished means. I've run out of time. If that's what you mean, I could test this for ages, right? Or there's been no bugs in the last 3 releases, so why are we testing this 4th one as stringently as we are? It's like, because the past has generally no real relevance with what we're doing. We need to see that independently each release, like things like that, where you can create overgeneralization arguments. Yeah, I think like the main argument I want to get to, I think, is like helping testers have a conversation that goes like that isn't. So putting the cards on the table almost with the other stakeholders in your conversation. Like, I'm not here to say no. I'm not here to argue against what you're doing. I'm here to look at what's been presented or present my case on what this is. And there's the evidence I'm presenting. What do we think? And then kind of talk about it like adults, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, there's a time and place to have arguments, and sometimes they're not helpful. Mm-hmm. It does make me think, like, the word that kind of popped up in my head was like, sometimes arguments are like so exhausting, right? And I felt this in the testing community over the years. It's like, it's kind of maybe it's like repetitive arguments or arguments that keep coming up time and time again that don't actually help progress things. And like, now my reaction is, I'm not getting involved in that. That's too exhausting.
Well, a good example of that would be labels, right? So I think Callum did a really good talk at PaceCon about this, of like, oh, it's not QA, that's QE, or this is checking and not testing. I'm like, I don't know why we're having this. So because I've not come from a testing background. No one in my Air Force career when I worked on aircraft went, I think you'll find that's not engineering, that's something else. No one ever had that argument. It's a weird thing that us as testers have like created this perpetual ongoing argument with ourselves about what things were, what words mean. Like, I understand to clarify a point we both agree on to move forward with the conversation, but like, 2 sides of the debate going at war with each other on LinkedIn.
What's your best tip to say, like, if there's an argument that you don't want to have, like, how do you approach that I guess like in the context of a testing project or something? If something keeps reoccurring and you're like, I'm exhausted, I don't want to have that conversation, that's not helping us. Do you have any thoughts on like best ways to tackle that?
It's a really good question. I think I tend to like not call it out's the wrong term, but like what's your ideal outcome you're trying to get right now? But the conversation we're having, what is it you're trying to get out of this? Do you want me to agree with you? Do you want to proceed with what you're doing? Do you want me to argue against you? What is it you're trying to? Because if you just highlight to someone, you realize we're having an argument right now, right? Like, what's this argument about? Is it about the thing we're talking about, or is it about something else? And just be kind of almost calling like we're having a conversation. I think the conversation is meant to be about this, but is that what we're having the conversation about? What's the outcome that you want? I think if you don't want to have the conversation, obviously you don't want to have the argument. Obviously, you can remove yourself. That feels like the kind of nuclear option. I think often you've got to understand that sometimes that conversation is going to happen over and over again, potentially, and you're going to be in the same place like the week after. So if you've got like a really challenging person that kind of argues against releases or for releases every other week of the same argument, you can do your best to have independent conversations with that person or persons, trying to bring them onto your way of thinking, trying to understand their viewpoint, etc., etc. But to use a Stoic method, I understand that some people aren't going to do that, and they're just going to continue to make belligerent and challenging arguments for just the sake of it. That is the nature of people. Marcus Aurelius has a good quote where he says, "When you wake up, assume that everyone's going to be horrible to you and rude and abrupt and not very nice. And then when they're not that, great, you have an amazing day. But don't assume that people aren't going to be like that, because they are."
Oh, amazing.
That's the same thing with, I don't want to have this argument again. I was like, you're probably going to have it again, right? Yeah. I'm butchering his quote, but that's generally the gist of what he says. And this guy was the Roman emperor, so imagine everyone had to be nice to him. So it's a weird thing that he said that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I'm trying to do, I guess, which is kind of a bit aligned with this, and from the community's perspective or the Motiverse perspective, is there's a phrase that I think it was some community guy, I think, that said it, Peter Block. There's a phrase that goes something like, if you want to change the future, then change your conversations. So my goal, like in the Motiverse, was like when I get exhausted with something, is like, actually, I'm not interested in this, so I'm going to change the conversation, and we can start to navigate like in a direction that we want to go. And then with that belief that as we're changing the conversation, we are going to change the future, because we're talking about the things that we actually want to talk about, and not or arguing over the things that we actually want to, head in that direction. And hopefully that helps us avoid like the exhausting conversations, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, tapping back into the AI stuff, like as you were talking about AI, and I was thinking about like AI slop in the context of like critical thinking.
Yeah.
And like, we all use AI for different things, but like as an example, for me, we kind of use AI for a lot of content stuff, or people submit stuff to us, or we're reviewing submissions, articles, whatever it might be. And the more AI has come, like literally, the more we've preferred like these types of conversations, because like there's literally, you can't fake the AI, and I feel like we can go into so much more depth. But when we're using AI tools, it's like we have to be more critical in how we look at them. We have to be able to identify everything it outputs. And like, I guess like one of the skills I'm like naturally picking up is like AI slop. And like sometimes I'm like, I point out to people, say, "Oh, that's very AI written. I can tell." Just by certain words. And the words are changing constantly as AI changes. But like one recent word is quietly. Quietly.
My favourite one was I don't know if the Goblin one skipped you by, but there was a period where ChatGPT was inserting euphemisms and references to goblins in everything that it presented for like 3 weeks, and they had no idea why I did that. I just turned it off. So it was in people's emails, like just like an email about like we're going to set up a meeting, and something sort of weird sort of reference to a goblin would be in there. I think you're right. I think the AI slot. So there's two parts of that, right? There's a slot problem, which is people aren't using their reasoning skills and critical thinking to interrogate the thing that's being written back or generated or created or whatever it is, because it kind of defeats the purpose of using AI in the first place. Like, I'm using this thing to speed it up. Like, why would I spend time going through what it's produced to make sure it's correct? So that's kind of defeats the purpose. I could have written it myself in that time, so I can see the argument. So that's definitely one part of it, one problem with it. The other part is just volume. It's just sheer volume, right? The chat. I think that a difficult we're going to have with testers, especially if we try and maintain a human in the loop test approaches with AI created content or applications, is like, guess what? You're going to be the thing that slows it down, because there's more material can be produced than I can reasonably even read, like, and ingest, like even summarize. I could ask AI to produce me a PhD thesis, 150 pages. Guess what? It's going to do it quicker than I can even read that. So how do I know what it's written is good? How do I know what it's written is concise and accurate and has the information that I need? You can fall back to your critical thinking skills and think about what's gone into the creation process when it's been trained with something. do we know that data is impartial and always correct and accurate? No, it isn't. It might have biases in it. It might have poor references. We know that when it constructs a document, it constructs it in a certain way. So I can read it. I can read and look for those telltale signs. So I think that if we essentially need to tackle the slop in two ways, is like pushing back against the avalanche, but also just it feels really difficult because I'm even talking myself out of it. Of like, I'm going to use AI to help me draft an email to somebody, but then I spend 10 minutes reading the email or what it's written to rewrite it. Well, what was the point of me using the AI in the first place? So there's that element of like trust verification. It's like a really fine balancing line between like how much do I check it versus I actually want to get the benefit of using it in the first place. And I think in that kind of really difficult sweet spot is where we need to sit. Maybe that helps with the AI slop, but I think it's at the moment it feels like a losing battle, especially on social media. I think the videos and stuff that gets generated is just wild and just never.
I guess that
yeah,
like ChatGPT had Sora AI, was it the video, and then they shut it down. Perhaps they lacked critical thinking when they launched it and didn't fully understand the direction a tool like that could go in, and you can only imagine all the problems it would have had, not just from a business perspective, but like all the legal standpoints and just the stuff that was being produced. It's just like wow.
Because unfortunately, like, and again, this is that Marcus Aurelius quote of like, there are some people in the world that aren't very nice, or don't necessarily have views and perspectives that align with your own. It could be broadly different, and there's definitely bad actors in the world. There's also lots of good people, but like I think as a tester, you're often going, here's a thing I want you to look at, and I go, well, what happens if it does that? And what happens if it does that? And what happens if this was to happen? And what happens if these three events all land up and this would happen? Right? You become a what if machine, right? Which helps you look at test cases, scenarios, risk coverage. It feels like when they did something like Sorry, they didn't go, I wonder what happens if bad people get hold of this and they have less than ethical viewpoints on what they could do with it. What's the worst damage that they could do? Oh, actually, could be horrendous. Maybe we shouldn't do that, or maybe we should put additional controls in place. It feels like that critical thinking element was not implied to the same way that it would be with maybe more critical-minded individuals and tests to do that. That's the kind of thing I would think about. What's the worst thing this thing can be used for? What's the biggest risk of this platform being released? What could it or couldn't it do? It could be really bad. Okay, well, what's the risk? Let's kind of explore that. And it feels like in exact examples, they didn't use that for that at all. And they quickly realised, oh, this is a bad idea. Let's run it back.
That's actually got me thinking of, dare I say, how do you shift critical thinking left, or how do you apply continuous critical thinking?
Then we went through a new acronym there, continuous critical thinking. I think so. If you think about it as a software lifecycle or a test lifecycle, how would I apply critical thinking? Is let's do something simple like I'm going to do static analysis of some requirements that have been written. Right, it's a basic shipwreck principle. I'm going to look for testability. I'm going to look for ambiguity, gaps, etc. Another element you need to think about is like the person that's had to produce that. Are they under time constraints? How experienced are they? In the age of AI, the thing they've given me has probably been generated out of ChatGPT or Copilot. They've probably given it loads of prompts, given it information, and they spat out loads of requirements for me to again sift through. So thinking about like not necessarily the worst case scenario in every example of what could happen, but certainly thinking about what the logical things and steps that could have taken place to produce the content in front of you. What shortcuts could have happened? What would I do in their position if I was pressed for time? I'm mostly thinking negatively, but generally critical thinking is about trying to separate your bias from the thing in front of you. So it's a bit easier for testers to bias towards the negative than it is to more positive things. Like if I'm in a release team and I've done 1,000 releases in 10 years, I'm probably quite upbeat about like, let's just kick this thing out the door. It's going to be amazing. Versus a tester who's been on 3 projects and they've all been absolutely terrible and they've been there've been lots of production release problems and all sorts of things. Guess what? They're probably going to be more apprehensive about pushing something into release. So critical thinking is about pulling those two perspectives out and just looking at the evidence. How that applies to shift left, in my example, maybe removing your own biases when you're doing that review. So just because you're an experienced tester and you've read thousands of requirements before, don't take that. Make sure that you are looking at the due diligence just because you're confident in your experience that you necessarily know whether that requirement has been well written or not. You still apply the same rigor if it's the first time you've done it. Does that help? I don't know if that answered your question. I went a bit around the houses again.
No, it's good. It makes me think of bottom-up processing. Have you heard of that term before?
Bottom-up thinking, yeah.
And I actually discovered it through kind of neurodiversity, autism type stuff. Like, apparently, neurodivergent people or autistic people tend to look at all the pieces to make sense of the picture, and then they figure things out. They make sense from lots of little pieces, rather than like thinking from the top down, where they say, "Oh, we have to build this, and this is how we're going to build it." We look at the picture, the ecosystem, the business, the project, all the data points, and we probably just generally pay more attention to all the things, and then because of that, they tend to say, the experts tend to say that neurodivergent people tend to, have great attention to detail, but it's because this is how we process things. This is we're paying attention to all the little things, and of course that makes sense, right? So it's almost like critical thinking is that bottom up process. At least partly is like that can be a way to think about critical thinking.
It's like it's deconstructing the thing in front of you, right? Which is systems thinking, but a little bit more kind of expanded. So it's like, let's again, I'll try and use an example. Someone's used an AI tool to produce an application, and you've been asked to just look at the risk of it going into production. I want to use that example because that's probably the most common one that kind of comes up. It's like, so system thinking on what you're talking about would go like, okay, what's the type of AI that was used? What's the data that it was given? What applications have access to? How has it been internally developed? How has it been tested internally? Where does it fit with the organization? What's the end use case for the business? Does it align to the requirements? All the things a tester would kind of think about and go through these bits. If you break that back to critical thinking and you kind of strip it back even more and you deconstruct it even more, we are two people in a room having a conversation about putting something into production. One wants to do it, and one is potentially arguing against the case. So guess what? That immediately sets up an adversarial nature to the conversation, or it can naturally just flow into that route. So knowing that could naturally happen, being aware that how that conversation can naturally try and avoid that happening. Right, that's the nature of how that conversation would naturally occur. Right, is I've built this thing. Can you sign off so we can go into release? Very easy for me to go, no. It's very easy to get your ego involved in the conversation because you then have the power, right? It's very easy for that person to then get upset. So you can see how the emotion starts to creep in. So even though it's just a conversation between two professionals, if you take a critical thinking skills above, even a step further than the systems thinking, like, are we tired? Is it the end of the day? You start to bring in human factors type things into your conversations. So like I always tell my testers, the analysts that work for me, is like, if you're ever signing off test cases for me or doing reports, don't do it at the end of the day. I don't want you to do it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You've just had lunch. It's hot. You've sat down. You're then writing out something for me. You're probably going to be tired. You're going to be sleepy. There's a cognitive impact to doing that. Like, how many times do we push releases like Friday afternoon? Because there'll be no users on the air, but it's also a terrible time for the developer to do that. They've had a long day, a long week. You're asking them to work late into the evening to push something out. They're going to make mistakes. That element of deconstructing at that bottom up is something that was taught to me in the Air Force, which I didn't really come across when I moved into IT, into software testing. So one of the things the Air Force did that I haven't really seen too much, it would be something like, say, like around root cause analysis of an incident. So if there's an incident in production, with a system that you're potentially testing, hopefully you're doing some sort of root cause analysis to that problem statement, right? And it would be like, where did the test not catch the thing? Or we should have caught it at this level of test, but we didn't have enough coverage. That's why it happened. Or the environment had something issue, or someone released a config change you weren't aware of, and you'd go down to the technical aspect of why the problem happened. You very rarely look at the wider thing other than the technical element. In the forces, there was always the technical element. So if there's an accident with an aircraft, 100% there'd be a technical element. It's like landing gear failure or something. Why did it fail? Was a mechanical malfunction that occurred? But other things would start to get involved almost immediately. What was the atmosphere of the day like? Was it late in the evening? Was it early in the morning? Was it hot? Was it cold? These are all atmospheric conditions that would not just affect the aircraft itself, but also the individuals around it. So guess what? If I'm cold outside with like a jacket on and I'm freezing to death doing something really technical, I'm more than likely going to make a mistake than I would be if it was like 20 degrees and I'm just wearing a t-shirt. I'm uncomfortable, I'm cold, I'm tired, I want to go to bed. These human factors start to creep in and stack on top with your Swiss cheese model to create your errors. And the Air Force would go a step further to that. It would be like, don't do things at a certain time in the morning because your circadian rhythm is naturally low. Or don't be taking caffeine during high pressure situations because you're more likely to take risks because you've got caffeine in your system and your adrenaline's running. There's all these kinds of other elements. And we don't really do that with root cause analysis when we're testers. I've certainly not seen it with clients I've worked in where they go into the human factors of why a mistake might have happened, or even the processes around what that happened. Like, the checking system that we have goes to one developer and he checks before he does the code commit and then signs it off. Okay, well, how many does he get those a week? He gets 200 a week. Guess what? He's probably overworked, and he's probably going to have to do much less checking than he should do, given the nature of the size of the release you've given to him. That's another example where we don't really consider it. We just go, well, he missed it. That must be the problem. There's a reason why he missed it, or there's contributing factors to why they missed it or why she missed it. And your critical thinking expands on your system thinking for your bottom up that we spoke about, where I'm trying to pull apart all the different aspects that might have contributed to the thing in front of me and look at the evidence of what I've got without bringing the biases in from them or from us.
What do you think about critical thinking for the whole team? What's your experience? Like, is it testers that are generally more like critical thinkers, or how do other team members tend to react to the idea of being more critical thinking?
Yeah, I think it'd be good. This would be a good example of a generalisation, which is a critical thinking term. So generally, testers, overgeneralisation, testers tend to be good critical thinkers because of the nature of the job that we're doing. That, again, cause or effect, you could make the argument either way. We have to do it because of the nature of the job, or we're good at it, therefore we go into the job, nature versus nurture. Right, so I would definitely agree that the testers generally tend to be better at it than other people in the project team. But at the same time, I don't think it's really role specific. It's definitely person. So the developer I used to work with in my Desert Kinetic was an unbelievable critical thinker, more so than I was, and he purely gone into development. Obviously, he did testing as well, but his primary skill set was development. And the example I used for him was we were on a project where we were asked to find a problem, and it involved effectively checking a count of a number. And because of how his brain worked, he was like, if you just view the thing as a count, it's quite hard to tell what the count's doing. If you visualize it as a graph in real time, we can see the line as it progresses in the count. Because he thought of it like from how he would cognitively ingest information, like he's visually skewed, it'd be better as a graph. He created a graph to visualize it, and we immediately spotted a problem that 5 other people couldn't see because you couldn't see it in the count. Basically, there was an error in the count. You couldn't see that as a number just spinning around on the UI. If you did it as a graph, you could quickly see the graph was doing this. Oh, look, there's errors all the way through the count. So an example, like I think critical thinkers, I think they're all over the place in terms of IT, but maybe we just naturally gravitate towards testing because we're required to do it. I don't want to criticize our BA community or our PMs or anyone like that, but I think if you think about the motivations of the task, also leads to whether you need to be critically thinking or not. Like a PM or a delivery lead is ultimately about managing a task to completion. I need to make sure that the management of that task doesn't necessarily naturally lead me to go, I need to think critically about every single piece of this and pull it to pieces to find out where the problems lie and what will work and what won't. I have a team that does that for me, or I should have. So they delegate or delineate some of that responsibility to other people. Again, for a BA, I think the BAs are good at critical thinking because they're often having to interpret very woolly information from people who work in the business into something tangible for a developer to create. Where I think that maybe lacks between the two is how BAs relate to developers. I've not really worked with any BAs who understand how development works in any real detail. They've not come from a development background. They've come from a business background. So understanding like what does it actually take to write 300 lines of code and then making sure that all those functions work correctly and it materializes on the screen in the way that you want it to look. So when you say, can you just move the check-in box from the left to the right and then make it this color and not that and then change the modal? And the developer goes, yeah. But the BA has no concept of like, that's 2.5 hours of work that they could have fixed a week ago, right? So I think because testers have to work with all those different roles, we're good at understanding their a developer's viewpoint is like this, and that naturally kind of increases your thinking skills because I can't rely that the BA is absolutely. I can't rely that the release team, I've got everything ready to go. There might be problems. You almost have to catastrophize your life, which is a bit of a challenge sometimes for testers to be doing. Hopefully that answers your question. I think that we know more than others, but by necessity more than nature, I think.
Yeah, it makes me think of silos and the pros and cons, and sometimes silos are good and sometimes they're bad. And we were actually talking about this on Twic just before recording the call. And it's interesting, right, that you say like BAs probably don't tap into these other areas, but as testers we're naturally tapping into all different parts of the business, and as a result we pick up these bits of knowledge and this understanding, even if it's a developer saying, oh, I have to fix this but it's going to take me a week. That's a bit of knowledge that we end up gathering and understanding, that if we make a request, like you say, of something, then we have an understanding how big of a task that is and whether that's a good investment of time or money, or whether we should, what type of fixes we might suggest need fixing, or stuff like that. So it's like that's interesting for me. I guess going back to AI a little bit, you touched on the volume aspect, as like this volume of code or this volume of content or documentation, and that's definitely been like a recurring theme that's popped up time and time again. I remember saying to Dan Faulkner from SmartBay on a previous podcast, he calls it the gap, and you mentioned it's volume, but it's like the gap and the volume is kind of the same thing, where there's all this code being churned out, and then everyone else is like scrambling to figure out how to keep up. So there's a gap with how people are, or testers are able to keep up with all the code, right? And it's essentially slowing things down. I think I ended up saying to her, I was like, it's actually quite rude that we're getting all this stuff thrown at us without consideration for the impact for everyone else. So it's like, whoever's pushing that, are they lacking critical thinking? And maybe that's like one problem. But I guess what I'm getting at is like, how do we deal with AI? Like the volume and the gap is like one type of issue we're dealing with. Have you seen like any other patterns that we need to get better at seeing, I guess? So if we see and understand these patterns that are showing up, And if we talk about them,
Yeah.
then we can get better understanding about them and be more critical about them, and simply like maybe having conversations around the problems that it raises.
Yeah. So unfortunately, those AI conversations with us will like default back to fallacies, and fallacies again is something that's big part of critical thinking. And in that book of arguments, again, I'm not sponsored by it; it's just a good book. They list them all, and then they give you examples. So if we can identify that we're having these arguments or those fallacies, maybe that helps with some of the problems that we're listing with AI. So an example would be like, appeal to automation. So like, if you automate it and remove the human, it makes it better. I was like, is that always true? Right, in every scenario, can I think of that? Is that correct? No. Sometimes yes, other times no. Another good example would be like appeal to authority. That's another one. So like, well, OpenAI have released it, and they're a multi-billion-pound company, or trillion, how much they're worth now. So it must be an amazing system. So that's an appeal to a higher authority than ours. Is that true? Where's the evidence to back up that claim? Right, we don't do that. This is one that happens with AI as testers all the time. It's like, do you want it to be good or do you want it to be fast? It's like, is that a constructive argument? Like to have either or, again, that's a black and white argument. Like, it's this or it's that. You're creating a false dilemma. That's not what the conversation's about in the slightest. I don't know why we made it that way. So I think my goal in listing these is to help testers spot them. So when you're having these conversations around AI, you should be listening out and looking for these things. Like hasty generalisation. So I think as testers, we naturally generalise AI is a bit trash because funny enough, we spot all the bad stuff because that's naturally what we do. But I think that can also negatively impact us, that we have a more negative viewpoint on AI created code and content than someone who has a different perspective. So don't overgeneralize your viewpoint on something. Or another one would be like, AI's not really got anything really badly wrong yet. Like, this cost like a lot of money. Like, so like survivorship bias might be the best description of that one. If you think about that, like me personally, no, I've not had it create a massive problem for me, but I can certainly Google stories of entire production databases being deleted by an AI agent, and it circumnavigated the controls, and it didn't know why it did that when they asked it afterwards. Like, that's definitely happened. So like, and that, I guess that happens the other way, right? I've only ever worked with systems that's gone catastrophically the way. And then I think the biggest thing at AI, and this is where I think I'm trying to address your question of why don't the people that are pushing the AI to us see it, is it's like tool-shaped thinking. They see a hole, which is a problem, and they just push AI into it. Instead of going, what is the most appropriate way to solve that hole, right? What is the most appropriate methodology, tooling, technology, solution, process, people to address the problem that I have? At the moment, businesses just seem to go, AI will do it. Instead of going, is AI appropriate given the problem and the use case and my constraints and my context? Again, critically thinking, oh, actually, no, we can just do that within Excel. Like, the amount of times I've had someone like, we could do all this in Copilot, we could blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's a calculation in Excel. It'll take me like 5 minutes. Like, we don't have to write a structured prompt to then feed it loads of information to calculate something. I can just do that in Excel myself if you want. Mm-hmm. It's the same. I don't understand why every problem we have now is in the IT world is like AI will fix the solution. So hopefully that answers, gives you some what I think testers should look out for, and how maybe that critical thinking is lacking because people that are pushing the AI tools on us have probably drank the Kool-Aid. So they're all, but again, I can totally understand. Again, thinking critically here, I can understand why they have a viewpoint. Right, I've not worked in somewhere like Anthropic, where they've spent millions in R&D building models and training them, and taking them from basic proofs of concepts into the incredibly powerful tools that exist now. Of course, I think it's the next thing. Of course, I think it's going to be a solution to all of mankind's problems. Right, I totally get it. Like, it's the next thing. 100%, man. But I need to go on an evidence by evidence basis, case by case basis. which people don't like to hear, because we want to make like little boxes in our brain and we just put it in the box. So we're like, I'm thinking about AI. It goes in my AI box in my brain. I don't want to critically think, break down the problem from bottom up and understand the context, the use case, the risk, the background, the technology, the individuals involved, the politics, the budget. Like, no. It's AI, good, bad. Like, we don't want to do the uncomfortable grey work in the middle. And I think maybe testers were too bad the other way, just as much as people are pushing tools back onto us.
I heard a quote in passing. I was at an event, just walking by like a panel discussion, and I just heard someone say, everyone wants to do AI strategy, but no one wants to do AI governance. It's interesting, right? It's like the cool and the exciting. Maybe that's like another way to look at problems we're having or systems or products we're building. Is like everyone wants to work on the cool stuff, but when it comes to like the more serious, essential things, the critical thinking, the looking at all the risks and problems and legalities. I mean, that melts my mind. I don't want to do that. Even though we kind of do it a bit as quality people to some extent, but
certainly.
It's interesting though, right? It's like I guess where that leads me is like we should be speaking to more AI governance people. Who are the people doing that kind of work, and what does that look like, and how can that inform us as like quality and tech professionals, right? I think that stuff like that I think could potentially open up our minds a bit more into all the things. But I think
and it's weird. It's weird. I think a lot of the big AI companies at the moment are actually hiring people with philosophy backgrounds. For kind of related to the problem that you're outlining of like, how do we govern a thing that we've produced? It's the Pandora's box analogy, right? We've opened the box now. We can't close the box. The box is open. AI is out in the world. It's doing a thing. We're, unfortunately, like human beings always do, catching up with how do we look after the thing? What's the Jurassic Park quote where he goes, instead of thinking about how we do it, we should be thinking about if we should do it. And the AI governance comes about that is like, yes, we've built it, but what is ethically the most appropriate way to use it given different contexts? What controls should we put in place? What protections should we put in to prevent this being misused or mistreated? You're never going to get completely wrong malicious actors and malicious people using it for nefarious means. But I think without governance being considered, like you've said, it just becomes a technical strategy, and usage of AI isn't a technical problem. It's a people problem, right? It's just one side of the argument. If I have a framework that tells me how to test it, great. But there's nothing in the framework about how someone could jailbreak it and put something unethical in it and get the chatbot to reply something they don't want to. Well, then it's kind of wasted. You've purely considered the technical elements and not the governance around how someone would be using it in the business. Don't using client data would be a good example of that, right? You shouldn't be putting client data inside an AI model, certainly not one that's externally facing. That's a governance problem, right? That's not a technical thing. Although it's a technical implementation, I can't prevent someone from just copying, pasting some client information, just chucking it in ChatGPT and doing something with it. So there's got to be some governance around you not doing that, and some protections and punishments upstream if you were to deviate from that.
It's a lot to think about, right? Yeah. I mean, it's been great to chat. I appreciate it. Appreciate catching up again. Any final words before we wrap up the conversation?
I think I'm hoping through my ramblings that testers need to make sure that evidence oversways your opinion on something. So, not trying to remove your opinion from testing or your experience, but strong testing is an evidence-based argument, and critical thinking is an element to help you generate that. So, instead of just saying, as an example, I don't think this release is ready, it's like, I don't think this release is ready because of X, Y, and Z, and this is the evidence I have to back that statement up. We need to do more of that and less of the first thing.
I love the evidence. Yeah, especially I love the evidence angle as well. It's like going to the source, perhaps, or having a practice of seeking out the evidence or learning about the evidence and knowing what exists or what knowledge exists. I think there's a lot in the quality space that we could probably improve from that perspective that perhaps we're not talking about as well. So it's super interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you very much, Stephen.
No, thank you, Rosie. Always good.
Awesome. I'll see you in the Motiverse.
Yeah, see you in the Motiverse. Thanks, everybody.